Hero of our story today, a woman named Lucy Ashen from London, had exactly this kind of neighbor. Her strange neighbor has lived in the opposite apartment for over 20 years. As Lucy herself once wrote on a social network, this woman, who lives in a one-bedroom apartment opposite of mine, was always very withdrawn, and even when I tried to talk to her and somehow dispel her loneliness, she always kept her distance. It so happened that despite living half of her life opposite the mysterious old woman, Lucy knew virtually nothing about her elder neighbor, just her face and her name. She also knew that no one had visited the woman in a very long time. People were saying that the old lady had a number of mental problems and that she didn't communicate with anyone at all, and only left her home once a week to buy groceries at a nearby store. Perhaps it would have remained this way. Everyone has a right to privacy after all, if it weren't for one incident that changed everything. I remember having a conversation with my 14-year-old daughter, said Lucy. She said that even when I'm as old as her neighbor, she'd still help me because she understands that it's hard to be an elderly person. Her words got me thinking, what if the neighbor lady needed our help? What if she didn't have any relatives that could help her? Easier said than done, however. No matter how much Lucy tried to have a heart-to-heart with her reclusive neighbor, the woman simply kept avoiding her. She always said she didn't need any help and then just went about her business. Lucy wanted to help the elderly lady somehow, but she couldn't do anything since the lady refused to accept her help. Weeks and even months went by like this. Whenever Lucy would meet the old lady on the staircase, her whole appearance would be screaming for help. Her clothes were old and dirty, and the woman herself didn't look that great. The last time Lucy saw her neighbor was the last straw. This time, Lucy Ashen decided to be especially persistent. She offered her assistance to the elderly neighbor, as she had done so many times before. The neighbor, of course, rejected her help and said that everything was fine. But eventually, she did let Lucy inside her apartment. What Lucy saw there was truly terrifying. Sure, she assumed that her neighbor couldn't keep up with the household chores, but she could have never even suspected how bad it was. The elderly neighbor lived in complete filth. The apartment was in a terrible state, almost uninhabitable. The floor was covered in a layer of dirt, and that's just what Lucy could see from the doorway. Frightened and saddened by the way her poor neighbor was living, Lucy basically begged the old lady to let her into the apartment, taking her hand and saying that she just wanted to help. So the old lady finally gave in. What Lucy saw inside the apartment was much worse than her expectations. The floor was covered with a huge layer of dirt. Furniture and clothes were old and torn. There was almost no food in the kitchen or in the fridge, and what little food there was past its expiration date. But that wasn't all. It turned out that the woman hadn't taken a bath in almost 13 years since the central heating in her apartment was broken and there was no running water. The woman slept on a dirty mattress that was lying right on the dirty floor. There was mold on the walls and a broken window in one of the rooms. It simply wasn't suitable for life. The elderly woman's physical and mental health deteriorated by the day, so she couldn't clean the apartment and take care of herself on her own. So, without giving it much thought, Lucy decided to clean up her neighbor's apartment. She later confessed to the reporters, "It was horrific. Nobody should live like this." So without stopping to think, I decided to help. Who else if not me? There was simply no one else, and Lucy got down to business. Together with her 14-year-old daughter, she spent several days cleaning the apartment. They threw away all the old furniture and spent over 60 hours cleaning, until the apartment began to resemble something a human might live in. In addition to that, the woman posted on Facebook, asking her friends to donate things they didn't need anymore, furniture, kitchen utensils, etc. But she couldn't have even imagined the response to be so overwhelming. Her post instantly spread over the internet, and soon, many neighbors read it and literally lined up to fill the old woman's home with everything she might need. In just a day, Lucy collected 80% of the things she listed in the post. A few more days later, the woman had a good bed, clean linens, beautiful furniture, and new clothes. But that still wasn't the most important part. The most important part was that she had friends who began to visit her and help her. The old lady simply blossomed in response, because for so many years, she had no one to even talk to. She began trusting her neighbors and accepting help from them. The neighbors even made a schedule of who and when will cook food for their elderly neighbor. It's not difficult for us. We all cook something at our homes every day, so it's no trouble to share some home-cooked food with our neighbor. Lucy's daughter Ruby was also determined to make her elderly neighbor's life a little better. But Lucy didn't even realize how friendly they'd become. Ruby spent her whole summer keeping company for the old lady, while her mother was renovating the apartment. Today, the elderly neighbor calls Lucy her daughter, since she was the only person who's ever done something so nice for her. Now the residents of this building live in perfect harmony. They say that people in big cities don't like each other and don't want to socialize. Maybe they just don't need a reason to show how kind they are. This beautiful story once again reminds us that sometimes it doesn't take much to make another person happy. So,